is telling us as men to be common, to fall in line, to fall short of any visions or plans God has for us. But what about being uncommon? This is a movement of men seeking to build an eternal legacy. A journey of men on mission to rise above the common, to experience sustainable life change. This is Uncommon Disciple. Welcome to the Uncommon Disciple podcast. I'm Michael Bowen, of course, with Jared Gibson and our good friend, Micah Richardson. Good evening, Micah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Mike, it's good to have you here. I'm going to read a scripture, Psalm 133:1. It says, "How wonderful and pleasant it is when brethren live together in harmony."
Amen.
And from the first time we met, I knew that we would hit it off in a coffee shop, and I knew that God had ordained our meeting. But let me just give your bio so people know that are listening where you come from. So, Micah supplied a bio to us, and he says, Micah spent 16 years as a public servant in law enforcement. Retiring as a staff sergeant, he commanded patrol, investigation, SWAT, and fugitive units. Micah received his state instructor status in 1995 and has since taught precision, pursuit driving, defensive tactics, crisis intervention, de-escalation, and other courses to attendees locally and across the nation. He and his wife, Jana, consult together abroad in areas of preparedness, personal, and business safety. And people hate when I read that stuff. It's better coming from you,
dude,
right?
It sounds glorified. I'm just a good housekeeper. That's what I am.
Good
janitor.
Hey, listen, I consider myself a bondservant for Christ. So whatever title I have, it's by His grace, right? So
yeah.
It's good seeing you.
Amen.
Good seeing you. Thank you for coming.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Good. So yeah, give us some background to this story. First, probably how we met, right? And then certainly get into your time in law enforcement, and you supplied us some information that I think would be pertinent to the listeners.
Sure.
Certainly, as I was reading it, it stirred up some old hurt in my life, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes some things I don't like to talk about, that we'll talk about on the air. And I think Jared probably has some insight there as well. Mm-hmm. He's smiling and shaking his head. So yeah, go.
Well, if I recall, I think I was sitting in a coffee shop and you came over and asked me about my beard, and 2 months later you have one and it's coming in rather sexy. I might.
Is that weird? Did I ask you about your beard?
No,
I did not.
Not at all.
That would be really strange.
That would be odd, but look where you're at. So, no, we met a couple months back over in Black Rock Coffee here in Castle Rock, and you're one of only two men. I think I told you this last time we talked. You're one of only two guys that's ever in my life ever come up and just started talking kind of scriptural, biblical, and showcased your heart like publicly to a stranger. And it just, I don't know, man. I just had a whirlwind of emotion inside me. Like, who is this dude? Like, where's he coming from? And why in the world are we having this conversation? Yet at the same time, I was completely engrossed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's odd. When you had shared that with me, I'm struck too that not more guys are outward about their faith. It's kind of like this undercover, not to bring law enforcement into it, but
that's all right.
A lot of guys are undercover Christians or undercover about their faith. And it's kind of like you have to give someone a special wink or a hand motion and say, "Oh man, do you know Jesus?"
Yeah.
We live in a culture that was built around being sensitive around everything, but like now everyone's tiptoes around even their own belief system.
For sure. Well, I don't know political, but we've emasculated the society to now we don't even stand up to be good husbands or good leaders or anything, or we're afraid unless we're in a circle like this and we talk openly behind closed windows. But yeah, I'm not that guy. I'll talk about it anywhere.
Well, yeah, that same coffee shop. And there's probably you said you stopped drinking coffee for a little while, but it's obviously something I love to do. We had seen each other in that same coffee shop just a few months later and really kind of sparked off, I think, an intense friendship. We started staying in contact more, talking about the things of faith, and we had coffee at another coffee shop downtown just after that. So, coffee and faith.
Yeah, and you tiptoe in a world that I don't roll. Everybody knows you and your podcast now and your jits and everything, but actually I'm connected deeply with some guys that do roll. I got a couple of torn rotator cuffs. That's my excuse, but I'm a fighter in hockey. I'll throw down with anybody standing up.
Yeah.
I'll get my face beat in. You can see the scars. But you actually triggered on that a little bit too. And there's one guy in my life, Justin Dodge, who's a good buddy of mine, who's a career cop and a SWAT guy. And I really admire what he's done. You know, I think he's done through a second degree and he's coaching, and I love what he does with the kids, and he leads a pretty solid life.
Yeah. So. Justin, was over at the JIT pit, and they just, I think, reopened in Parker. So yeah, he's, I've heard, I haven't met him in person, but I heard he's just a really, solid tactical guy, number one, on the SWAT. And then also, he is a very high level Jujitsu practitioner.
He is.
And, I can't wait to meet him at some point.
Yeah. Good dude. He'd be good on here.
I heard he doesn't pull guard. So if anyone here does Jujitsu, you'll go look up what pulling guard is, but he doesn't sit down. He's looking to take someone down aggressively.
He's a beast for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, Micah, you shared some things, and I had asked you permission if we could kind of dig into it. It's some things that I think that guys listening, if they've experienced this when they were younger, they may not talk about it openly. And certainly it took me a long time to talk about what the topic that I think will lead into what led you into law enforcement, what led you into even your career now. But you talked about a time when you were younger and where you had some bad things happen.
Yeah, everybody's got a story. I don't know if mine's any worse or better. I don't compare.
Yeah.
There's an old adage, people, you'll forget what somebody says, you forget what they do. You'll never forget how somebody made you feel. And I kind of use that as my mantra from 6 years of age till 8 in small town Kentucky, if you can imagine. It's kind of thinking where it gets to the reputation. I hate to say that, but elder abuse in the church, sodomy went on for 2 years, and neighbors. And I had an horribly abusive father, drunk and in denial. And I told him and told my grandparents, and in my own way at the time, I recall sharing what was going on, and there was complete denial. In fact, I got punished and kind of beat down for it. And then you just kind of go into a compartmentalized cave. And as a little boy, I didn't know what was right and wrong. I just knew something hurt. And, but I didn't know this, I didn't know the scars until later. I didn't talk about it, with a person in my life until I talked about it with my wife. And that didn't happen until 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we were married a long time by the time I actually shared it.
Yeah. So you were carrying that burden for that long. It's interesting because I didn't talk about my event. I don't think it was until I was in my 40s. I think I just turned 40, and I had always looked at it. Mine happened with a babysitter that watched us when I was 8 years old, and she had come over. My parents were over at her parents' house, and it was a fondling incident. And I never thought much about it, because as a young boy, it's almost glorified, right? Where, oh, you had that experience. Then it becomes a cool thing. But when you really think about it, I think she was double my age. I think she was 16 at the time. And I told my mom about it. Actually, when I started talking about it, could this be one of the reasons why when I was younger, I had such a distorted view of sex and relationship?
Sure.
And certainly I think it played a part, and it was something I think I was embarrassed about it, but I was also, I didn't know what to do with the information. Right. It's like, okay. And then my wife was the first person I shared it with as well. I said, there was this incident that happened at 8 that replays in my mind that I had never talked about, because I think the few people that I shared it with the people that I was close with, I think it was an uncle or a brother. I'm like, oh, really? That's awesome. That's like every boy's dream.
Because she was a 16-year-old girl.
Yes. Yeah. Which is a distorted view on, something that God, created. He didn't create it to be between an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old. He created it to be in marriage. And so I was very confused about what to do with, with those feelings and emotions, and obviously probably something that what you did, I just buried it. Didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Mine certainly wasn't with a 16-year-old girl. And I've gotten to the point now where I can talk about it openly. Obviously, I'm sitting on a podcast talking about it. I can tell you it was the hardest thing I ever came to terms with.
Yeah.
The second And this is kind of, I guess in my own weird way, I tell people, if you got something to confess it and do it with a brother or somebody that you value in your life that will hold you to account. Cause it was like I let go of a 30-year-old demon. You know, it was just crazy how it just went away. And I don't hold on to anger or angst inside anymore. I don't have that fear of talking about it. Now I use it as a tool to go out and share. And it didn't have anything to do with the Me Too movement, not to add to or take away from it, but just my timeliness of sharing with my wife. When that demon left, man, I was like, I wish I had done this a long time ago. But I did at the time, unbeknownst to anybody, I used it as my driver in law enforcement when I went in, because 50 states wide, sexual abuse has no statute of limitations, essentially. So I knew if I got into it and I kind of went the route of the Marshal Service through the Sheriff's Department and got connected and all the things I wanted to do, I could kind of hunt these guys down. And that's what I did.
That's awesome. Jake and I, and Jared, we talked about this carrying a burden, right?
Sure.
A weight around for most of our life. And when you start emptying, I'll just say, to use an analogy, like this huge rucksack, right? The things that are in your rucksack, which are these feelings and emotions, shame and guilt, as you start offloading them out of your backpack with other brothers, right? The load does get lightened.
Oh, it's way light.
It does.
Yeah.
And I think that's why God tells us to confess our sins on one another, or that we should be in fellowship,
right,
with other brothers, to talk about these things, so we can see God's grace in it all. Because a lot of people will blame God, right? Yours happened in that, in that realm.
Oh, it happened in the church for
realm,
sure. Yeah.
Right. So you had every reason to really just stiff arm faith for most of your life, but you didn't. And I think the same is true with people that grow up with alcoholic fathers, right? They either turn to alcohol or they stiff arm alcohol and say, I never want to live that life.
Yeah.
So you took your pain, right?
Right.
Turned it over to God, and then you launched into a career to where you could say, I can help protect some others in this. So tell us about your career in law enforcement and what that looked like, and how that just kind of led you into the career that you're into today.
Well, I guess the quick story within the story is my parents divorced when I was 8. Dad was abusive, cheated on mom, blah, blah, blah. Left Kentucky, moved to Michigan. And I was a pretty wayward kid. I really was. My mom couldn't keep control of me, and I didn't keep control of me. I left home when I was 15, essentially. Stayed with a buddy of mine, built a room in their basement, lived there for a couple of years, ended up going back home. Grew up a little bit right before I graduated high school, but barely got through high school. I mean, I just liquid dumb is what I thought of myself. And got out, didn't know what I was going to do. College was calling my name. I played hockey. It was the one thing in my life I think was a bit of a saving grace, for me, was that sport, because it was the only camaraderie and teammate I had. I had a youth group that I went to, but you know how Jits is. I mean, it's a chess match and you're rolling, and it's a family. Hockey's the same way. So that propelled me into a couple of college offers and a couple of junior program offers. And I went and skated a little bit, had a good time, but I just knew that was not going to be my life. Even though I had pro tryout and everything, it just wasn't going to be my life. And I fell back into that calling of just, I want to go catch these guys. That's how empowering it was to me. And the burden I carried inside, I was like, I got to do something with this. I lived with it every day to the point of suicidal depression when I was college age, and fought through it. And fortunately, met the love of my life that really ended up, I think Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he put her in my way. And everything changed instantly on a dime on our first date. And I thought, looking in the mirror, I was like, there's nobody I'm going to ever end up with. And within 12 hours of that thought, saw her. And I was like, man, this is it right here. And we've been married 28 years. We've been together 30. And she was the one that guided me to take that career. I told her about it. I said, I want to do it. I started as a TAC medic, got my basic license, specialist license medic. I mean, if you're in the medic world, you know what this stuff means. But I pursued that, and I actually backdoored law enforcement through SWAT as a medic. and did that for a few years and started in the Detroit area and then moved to Jana and I got married in 94, moved to the Carolinas. I got a job at a big sheriff's department down there in the main city in the county, capital county, and never looked back. And it was all fugitive from there.
Yep.
So
when did you come to faith?
I was baptized when I was 11 with two of my buddies because it seemed like the cool thing to do. And I came to faith.
Hey, what did that look like? Was it like in a creek or was it in a
No, it was actually it was in one of those Baptist baptismal things up in front of the church up on the stage. Yep. No, Darren J and I all got baptized the same day. We were best friends all the way through high school. And we thought that'd be cool, but we all three really grew up and realized what our faith journey was all about. So sure. I say I think I came to Christ. I didn't know it at the time, but I think I really came to Christ when I was a little boy. Mm-hmm. And I saw what my dad was doing and I saw what others were doing in my life and how they just completely discounted everything. And sure. I took that as, I don't ever want to do that. I don't want to, you said stiff arm alcoholism. I kind of stiff armed, like if anything my dad ever did for me, he taught me what not to be.
Got it.
And so when I came to Christ, I was a little boy. When I came to faith to start understanding it, I think I was probably about 23, 24.
Sure. Mm. Yep. Yeah. And I find that true with people that grew up in the church, right? You remember that faith moment where you knew Jesus was real. And obviously the baptism doesn't save you. So that was right. Just your outward proclamation that you had, given your life to Christ, but really taking your faith walk seriously later in your adult life. So did you struggle with faith up through the 20s then, or like while you were in college? Did you have any struggles or setbacks, or did you always model Christ in the circles that you ran with?
Oh no, I was a horn dog.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I was. I
that's honesty. Right?
Oh no, I was. I don't mean like I slept around with everybody, but I chased skirt for sure when I was young. Because I saw a girl when I was 17. I thought it was like. It was awesome.
For sure.
That's why God made them that way. They did. I just didn't look at them through that the marriage lens, So no, I didn't grow up until Jana and I dated and just my eyes went off the world and went to her. I mean, instantaneously. I can't even tell you what the first date did to me. I mean, like that has, if nothing else, has hooked me for the rest of my life. In fact, when we got married, I love showing this. I put this ring on. My finger is 11.5. This is a 9.5 ring. It's never been off in 28 years.
Good grief.
Ever. It's never, I couldn't get it over my knuckle if I had to. I was just committed, man. And, but no, when I was young, I was a mess. I mean, even in my college years for sure. Yeah. But I wasn't a partier. I've never touched a cigarette. Not excessive drinker. I'm not a dope guy. Never have been. Yeah, I like girls.
Good for you. Good. I mean, good for you that you didn't grow up in the party scene. Not good for you that you struggled with lust up until you met your wife.
Yeah.
But I think that's, again, Jared and I can definitely relate. And I'm sure there's guys listening that they can relate to that as well.
If they can't, they're not honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Being honest with yourself is key.
Yeah. Good. Anything relate to you, Jared, that he shared?
No, I mean, I grew up like my mom, she died from cancer when I was 13 and, my brother went off to college because he was older than I was. So he was out of the picture. And then my dad, there was a lot of issues, a lot of abusive things that went through. And, like mine wasn't like sexual abuse, but mine was a lot of like mental. There was some like physical involved in there too. But like part of like what it turns into, because I can relate to like none of the friends I grew up with knew that anything like that was happening. And there's probably some people that are going to be listening to this that knew me as a teenager that had no idea that was going on. And it's an interesting thing of what abuse does, especially to men, and how somehow it becomes something like shame comes into play, but like there's something psychologically that a lot of men, it somehow makes them less of a man if something like that's ever happened to them, because like men are supposed to be powerful. They're supposed to stand up. They're supposed to fight. But when you're in, a vulnerable position, especially when you're young and, like there's stuff that happens. And, you know, like my big thing that I dealt with was always seeking approval, you know, wanting a dad to approve of me, you know, wanting older men to approve of me. And you know, I think that a lot of different men that have gone through different types of abuse, they all struggle with similar things like that.
Well, I think you hit on a key. As we get older, we want respect, I believe. And as we're young, we want approval. And it's kind of the same thing, right?
Sure.
I mean, when you think about it. So not surprised to hear that. Yeah. I again, everybody's got a story, but I go back to that statement I made earlier about it's how somebody makes you feel. And that feel, you can see it in your eyes. That feeling you just shared is a 20-year-old feeling. You know, I mean, there's just no doubt. And
right.
You start sensing that stuff, and I don't know, man. I'm sorry. That's hard.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I relate to it. I mean, I grew up in the same, I'd say the same type of lifestyle you did. I had moved out of my house when I was 16, but I had always sought the approval of older kids, right? So I think when I look back at the relationships I had with in my teen years, they were with guys that were older, like 2 to 3 years older, that were a couple of grades ahead of me in school. And I wanted to be that cool young little brother, you know, just doing whatever they're doing and doing it better. Right. So, and I shared this with someone, you know, when you're in an abusive relationship or an abusive household, I was in a total rebellion state. I didn't grow up in faith. You know, my dad grew up, from what I was told, in a Jewish home. My mom was Methodist. Right. So I had this weird, you know, dichotomy of, you know, this law-based Jewish faith with, you know, with this Methodist faith. But I grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia where all the kids were Catholic, right? So all I knew is if I didn't eat meat on Friday and I went to church on Sunday,
you were good.
I was good. I could rebel all I wanted, right? But that rebellion was against all authority. Anyone that because I couldn't trust what older people were telling me, because they weren't modeling the life. They weren't leading by example. But interestingly, when I joined the military at 17, I was watching guys, and I just told this story. I watched guys that were our company commanders in boot camp, right, in the Navy, and they would be yelling at us about something. But then I would look at them and say, man, they're modeling what they're yelling at me about. Yeah. My shoes aren't shined, but man, theirs are spit polish shined. You know, their haircuts are just like perfect. And so I respected them. I respected their discipline and guidance because they were modeling what they were asking me to model.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Good hockey coaches do that too.
For sure.
They're players, you know.
Yes.
For sure.
Well, being a coach and a dad, you know, and you talk about that. You know, we've talked about this and where, you know, leading by example, whether it be in your faith, in your family, or stuff that you're interested in the world of hockey. Yeah. You're coaching, you're skating, you're being a good teammate. So all of these things come into play. You're reffing games, and so you're actually modeling your faith in all of those areas of your life.
I hope I did.
Yeah.
You know, I met a kid the other night that I coached. He just got married, which was kind of weird. You know, the kid's like 25 now, and I'm like, holy crap.
You feel really
Dude,
old
I
when
coached
that happens,
him in
right?
middle school.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, he said to me, and this was actually just at a rec hockey game. We ran into each other, and he said, hey, I got married a few months ago, and he goes, did you get the invite? And I said, no, I didn't. He kind of looked at me weird. And anyway, we compared, and he did not have the proper address. He went out. But the long and the short of it, he said, you said something in high school when you first coached me as a sophomore, I'll never forget, is you better respect those young ladies that you ask out, and you better keep 2 feet distance between you when you go out on a date. He goes, I never forgot that. He goes, and it didn't have anything to do with hockey. Yeah. He goes, but you used to drop those little things on us all the time. It's good to know that somebody listened, you know?
Bro, are you the reason why we had the social distance all this time?
Do not bring me into COVID, man.
I won't hook you in.
I got to share I got to share you a funny backstory. You're talking about Philly. So, give your listeners a little bit of context. It wasn't like I just grew up and life was bad and I got sexually abused and, you know, had this crappy life. I had a lot of good in there, but there's a little bit of humor in here too that I think is worthwhile. So when I say dirt poor, I mean pig farmer, dirt poor, Kentucky. We sold chickens at 8 cents a chicken, like honest to goodness, to make a living, poor. And I, when I left Kentucky at 8 years of age, I went to an elementary school. It was all 100% white kids. And we did not have a TV growing up. True story. We moved to Detroit.
Oh boy.
I'm 8 years old.
Yeah.
And I go to school my very first day, and I have never seen a Hispanic, a black, and I didn't even know they existed. I'd seen like coloring books when I was young, and I remember that, but like I'd physically never seen in action on TV or live another human being that wasn't white.
Yeah.
Because I had a Southern drawl when I walked into school. And they asked me my name. I said, Micah. My name's Micah Stephen, because that's how I used to talk. And I got
in Detroit.
I got beat up at lunch my first day. And my second day, I got beat up. And then I made friends with this kid that lived down the street from me. And this little black kid, same age as I was, we became inseparable. And we ended up moving 4 months later because my mom's like, we got to get out of this neighborhood. We got robbed. We had our car was broken into. Yeah. But the long and the short of it is I actually learned more about culture in 4 months as an 8-year-old kid that impacted the rest of my life. So it kind of started off humorous that I'd never seen it. I didn't know it. But when I moved there, I became I just absolutely love humanity. I love culture. I travel the world when I get a chance. I go everywhere I can, speak where I can, do what I can. I love it.
Wow. That's amazing. I'll share a story with you of my cultural wake-up call when we come back from this break. And that is a kind of a funny story.
Isn't that weird?
No. Listen, in boot camp, there was guys from Kentucky or down in the South that really had no cultural experiences. And so when they showed up, their eyes were just like saucers. When they walked into a barracks of 110 guys and going, what just happened?
Yeah. Well, on the streets and law enforcement, working in the projects, they have their own culture there too. And you just tell them, hey man, I grew up in a culture that was just all hillbilly in a tiny little town. So it's just different people, different strokes.
But and that's, we'll lead out with this, that when you come together in Christ, all of those cultural barriers drop.
You're just brothers.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, gentlemen, we just wanted to take a pause in this podcast. And again, thank you for listening in. And we wanted to share some resources and companies that we hope that you'll find will add value to you and into your world. And one of these companies that we'd like to tell you about is Origin Maine. And if you've never heard of Origin Maine, their products are made right here in America. And their mission is to bring American manufacturing back to the U.S. We love what this company stands for. If you have not heard of Origin Maine, go over to their website and check them out, originmaine.com. And I've been there. I've been to their facility, and I've seen what they're doing with some of the towns in Maine, revitalizing communities and just making a positive difference in their area. So what we also love about them is also that their products are superior. They're very high quality, and literally we're fueled by Jocko Discipline Go, which is one of their products. We carry all of their supplement lines here at our Jujitsu Academy, and we see that it makes a difference in the people that use their products. I personally use it. I use Joint Warfare because I'm an old guy, and their krill oil, and then especially during this time of season, I use their Cold War as well. And they just came out with a new pre-workout that's pretty awesome. And so we know that you won't be disappointed. They also have a full line of jiu-jitsu gis and apparel. I've got a pair of Origin boots that are just indestructible. I love them, and they're comfortable. And again, they're made right here in America. And so as a listener and supporter of this podcast, you get a special 10% discount off of any product sold at originmaine.com. So head over to originmaine.com, and that is ORIGINMAINE.com, and enter OnCommon10 to receive 10% off of all of your purchases. That's OnCommon10. Thank you, and we'll get back to the episode. So the cultural wake-up call I had, Micah, growing up, yours is funny. It just brought back a funny memory. And I share the story with people that are close to me. So my dad worked for the airlines, and he moved us from the East Coast. Actually, I was born in California. My mom was pregnant when she moved from the East Coast out to Los Angeles. And I was born in Inglewood, California. It's like if you listen to some old Snoop Dogg stuff, Inglewood's up to no good. Jared's shaking his head because he knows the exact song.
Exactly.
All right. So anyway, we moved from California when I was 5 years old. And my dad moved us back to the East Coast. We lived in New Jersey for probably a few months, and then he moved us to inner city Philadelphia, just outside of the city. And I showed up my first day of kindergarten, right? This is the 70s. What was America's team back in the 70s?
America's team?
Yeah. They've got a big star in their helmet, you know?
Cowboys.
Yeah, the Dallas
Oh,
Cowboys.
yeah, with Roger Staubach.
Yeah. So I show up to an inner city Philadelphia school with a Dallas Cowboys jacket on.
Uh-oh.
So I learned a few things that day. Number one, I learned how to fight real quick, right? I think I got into 3 or 4 fights, and my jacket's all jacked up, and I'm all scratched up, and I come home and my mom's like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "They don't like the Cowboys here." So immediately the jacket went into the garbage, and she took me out to buy an Eagles jacket, and I was force converted.
Did you keep your Tony Dorsett jersey?
No, I got rid of every piece of evidence of ever being a Cowboys fan. And this is like Danny White was the quarterback back then, back in the day. But it was during that time, it was a cultural wake up call for me. I was like, man, people take their sports teams serious.
Yeah.
So it's good thing we don't do that with our faith now.
I know, right?
Hey, become a believer, or we're going to, smash your face into the ground.
I think they're giving away Cowboys merchandise for free now.
Oh, stop it. Hey, if you're a Cowboys fan, that's no blast on you.
Hey, man, I'm a Red Wings fan living in Colorado.
But I might still have a little bit of a Cowboys love, deep down in heart. No, I'm an Eagles fan. And I'm part Denver fan now because, we live here. So I typically adopt the home team, which was really hard to do in Florida.
Yeah,
northern Florida, the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah,
I couldn't do
not
it,
a whole lot of hope of that.
Couldn't do it. So,
their 2 hockey teams are doing good right now down there.
Yeah,
they're kicking butt.
It's good. So lead us into your time in law enforcement.
Sure.
Were you able to fulfill that dream of catching some bad guys that you used to dream of catching when you were younger?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you, I had a short career compared to some, and there's a reason why I stepped away, and it was to do this very thing on the private side. But I was very blessed. I had 25 guys that I hired in with, 23 of which went federal within a couple years, and we're all still 100% in contact to this day. But they all went and did their thing, and I did my thing, and I got on the fugitive side, got deputized. I actually worked at a sheriff's department, but I was deputized by the Marshal Service. They go out and they kind of commandeer you, and they can use you for their manhunts. But for the rest of the time, you can go out of state and track anybody that's absconded. And all I went after were those guys. So, I mean, we did our share of murder suspects, whatnot, but pedophiles were mine.
Have you heard of a guy named Victor Marks?
I do not.
You haven't?
No.
He chases a lot of these guys too, and he's got a huge ministry outreach. And I'd love to have him on the show at some point, but this is something that he's very passionate about. I saw him speak probably 15 years ago at a church in California. We went to go see this pastor, and you know what happens when you go up to see a pastor? They're never there, right? You're visiting from out of town, and this guy, Victor Marks, gets up, and he's got this thing too where he'll pull out a weapon, and he's like the quickest guy to disarm someone up on the church stage. He'll bring anyone up and literally disarms them within like a blink of an eye. But he's a former Marine, and he's kind of has this hillbilly drawl a little bit, and he tells a story. I think we bought his book and I read it, but yeah, he's got a huge passion for catching bad guys as well, and is really entrenched there. Yeah, so
I love it. I support some guys called Deliver Fund, and they're former law enforcement, and they partner together, and they track everything through social media, and they're top notch, really squared away. So, but yeah, I did that in law enforcement for 7 years down there. Moved out to Colorado and did it for a while here. Done a lot of training.
How big of a problem was that? I think, Micah, and again, there might be some guys listening that are engaged in pornography or prostitution, right? And don't realize that that the birth of these things happens through people that are trafficked. They're trafficked, or they've been abused, or they're coming from an abusive, family of some sort. How big of a problem was it when was it an eye opening for you when you got into law enforcement and you really started seeing these things unfolding, or
I guess I'd put it into context. I was pre-cell phone for the most part, pre-Google, pre-all of that stuff. So you kind of got to put it into context. I mean, we did it the old-fashioned way, right? So you think of the, I guess, old school. If you think of the what we call the pedo driving around in the white Ford panel van, that's kind of what you were looking for back in the day.
We call them creeper vans.
Creeper vans, yeah. I call them pedo vans. And that was... I mean, there was pieces of that were true, and you'd catch those guys. But what really impacted me is I went to the FBI, went to a training class on the sheriff's department dime on body language, and I got to tell you, it changed my law enforcement career. I mean, these guys the FBI's they're a punching bag for a lot of different things, but they're really good. Honest to goodness at investigatory stuff. And this body language class they taught us was specifically on how to catch people that are grooming. And I'd never even heard that word before. I had no idea that it happened to me and others. And that changed everything, because I can walk through Walmart right now and I can spot somebody from 100 feet away.
But how big of a problem is it here in the US, would you say? Based upon what you know today,
outside of numbers and statistics that you could pull up offline, I would say it's the third or fourth largest thing that we face outside of national defense.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with 1 in every 100 people. I mean, if you go, you can pull up registered sex offender website and just look at who's in your neighborhood.
Did you ever see that show, Catch a Predator, Jared? Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I would be so happy when those guys got busted. I'm like, oh man, they don't know what they're walking into, but I was, and that's, again, some of these guys, and I'm a grace guy, right? So even if people have been in that world or they've been caught doing these things, I believe that there's grace for people like that, right? That we are not just to snuff them out. I used to think that, like, hey, they don't deserve, they need to go right to hell. But, I would say, man, this was the exact wake up call these people needed to get caught. Right. And so when I would watch that show and I would hear the people say, I knew this was going to happen. And, and this is exactly what I needed. It was good to see that. But the other guys that were just, bozos and denying it and, I didn't know. And they'd pull up all these recordings. Right.
Right.
And so did you have to exercise a lot of restraint, Micah, when you would No,
I can answer that.
Man, that was
easily.
That was a fast, hard no.
No, not at all. And the reason for it is I'm a believer that whatever scriptural is God's word. That's number one. So that's easy. But the law is fair and it's level for every man, and we don't treat it that way. Our court systems make a mockery of it. I'll be the first one to stand on it, but I will tell you this: no, not once. I never had to pull back. I never had to restrain, because scripturally we're taught to hate evil.
Yes,
we can confront it. We can have righteous judgment on it, and I can look at it and I can confidently say I will call that out. From a law enforcement standpoint, I would enforce the law equally to every man that I ever approach. And I don't say that as a pat on the back or, I'm righteous. I'm just saying straight out.
You're a professional.
If you overstep that boundary once, you never get to look back. And I told you earlier, I've never had an energy drink. It's not because I want to, that looks good, man. I'll be honest with you. It does. I'm looking at it right now. Like,
you have to try the Jocko Discipline Go. I'm drinking the Dak Savage tonight.
Jocko Go.
Hey, listen, he's got a good product, man.
He does.
I love it. I think it makes my jiu-jitsu better. How's that?
I'm using it as an analogy, though, because I've not done it. It's kind of like I've never smoked. And I said, I'm never going to violate somebody's rights.
Got it.
And so I'm joking about the Jocko.
No,
drink,
I know you are.
My buddy Eli was just on his show recently. It was a good podcast.
Eli Crane?
Eli Crane.
Yes.
Running for Congress in Arizona, buddy.
Yeah.
Young Navy SEAL, kicking some butts.
Well, if he's listening, you have an invite, Eli.
Oh, he's going to come on.
I only listen to that. I listen to that. I don't listen to Jocko's podcast. Like, I'm not religious about it. But when someone says, hey, you got to go back and listen to this, I did go back and listen to Eli's. And I think I did see the Shark Tank episode that he was on.
Right.
Which kind of brought up
crazy,
kind of a giggle.
Yeah. No, he's a faith dude through and through. And, I'll finish answering the question this way.
Yes.
Did I see a lot of it? Yes. Is there a ton of it out there? Yeah. Is it unknown? Are people afraid to admit it? Yeah. All that stuff. You asked, did I ever have to restrain? No.
Yeah.
And the reason no for me, One, I knew if I crossed that line, I'd never go back. Don't want to do that because I have to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
But here's where I think God was working through me that I didn't know at the time. And I love telling this story. When you think about our Creator and what He's done that we don't understand, and when you get that aha moment, I had an aha moment. So I had retired law enforcement. My wife's a psychologist. She was running the counseling center at this church. We're a big church, and she had a private practice on the side, but we're in this counseling center, and the New Life church shooting happened. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember.
10 years ago,
Springs.
12, whatever.
Yes.
It's been a while back now. And I'd written all the P&P and stuff for this church. This is a church of about 10,000 people, ran their security team just as a volunteer. And they came to me and said, we want to hire you. We want to bring you on. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because of New Life. And I'm like, dude, we're not going to have a shooting here. And if we do, we'll deal with it.
For sure.
What I'm concerned with are active restraining orders and DVs and pedophiles and blah, 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 blah. Fill in the blank, all the stuff that we deal with all the time in law enforcement. And here's how God worked through me. So I went into law enforcement primarily to go hunt evil in these people that hurt kids. Got into it, found a lot of reward in a lot of different things, pursuit driving, tactics, and got into the defensive stuff. That was fun. But I got to hunt some evil. I really did. I got to put some good guys away, or bad guys away in a good way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Fast forward many years into the church, I'm hired in. I'm 5 years in, and a lady calls me from Arapahoe County and says, I was given your name. I don't know what to do, but I've got these registered sex offenders that want to go to church. And I went, how in the world do I let a registered sex offender walk into a church?
Yep.
It's the first thing that went through my mind, which was kind of judgmental, because I thought, well, they're seeking God's grace. I'm a sinner saved by grace.
Yes.
If they've screwed up, right? And yet I still had this conflict in my head of what I remember going through and compartmentalized and fought through, and half the reasons even drove me into my career.
Yes.
And so I've got all this junk in my head, and I just turned it over, and I really let it go. And I said, what do you want me to do? And, a couple of weeks later, I thought, I'm going to pray that prayer again, because I didn't get an answer. And I realized I was closing it out. I had an answer. I knew exactly what the answer was.
For sure.
You bring them in, and you take somebody in the security team, you let them sit with them. And they can go sit inside the worship center.
Yeah.
And if they got to hit the head, you walk with them.
Yes.
We at any given time at that church had 25 guys that were registered sex offenders coming to church.
Yeah.
They'd walk in, they'd sign in, they'd meet you, they'd do things. If they violated anything, I put them back in jail.
For sure.
And I can't speak to what God did to him or how the preacher got through to him, but it's not my job to judge him.
Yeah. I know we have some law enforcement guys that listen, because they've told me, and they're continually walking that line of faith and professionalism.
It's hard.
Law enforcement professionalism.
Yeah.
Where they have to uphold the law from a professional standpoint, but their faith is telling them, use this as a ministry opportunity as well.
That's right.
Right. Instead of just, slamming the door, there's no hope for this soul that I'm about to put in jail or arrest. And some of the evils that they've talked about, again, it's one of those where you can look at it and go, I never want that person around me.
Right.
But, that's the same people that Jesus ministered to.
Those are the only people I ever saw.
Well,
every story is,
again,
in the Bible
it's
that way.
People that were demonic oppressed,
Sure.
or, demonic influence, or people that were just straight up caught in sin. And so I think that when we start to judge other people's sin, right? You said, we're called to hate evil. That's what the Bible tells us, but we're to hate the sin, not the sinner.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And he calls us to love him and to love our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, and people have come to me, how do you know that these people aren't coming to your academy? And I said, well, for our professionals, our instructors, we make sure, but I can't background check everyone that practice jujitsu coming in.
Sure.
Right. And so, I never know. I could be in a supermarket and be around a very high level predator or, bad person. And I'll protect my family at all costs.
Sure.
But I'm to extend the same grace to them that it's been given to me.
Well, and you're to forgive how many times, right? So when I look at it through that lens, I can absolutely with confidence sit here before you say, I can forgive something. I don't have to trust it.
Yes.
And there's a big difference in those two things. And, one of the things, I do a lot of private contracting and instructing nowadays, now that I'm retired. And we're getting ready to launch a business into developing safety ministries for churches, not security teams, but safety ministries. And we've done a benevolence run on this for about 5 years, I guess, just helping churches out, done about 80 churches and been very successful. We said, you know what, we're going to make a business out of this. We're going to run with it. But one of the things, Michael, that we realized partway through this process of getting into education, the thing that seems the scariest, the biggest bang, the gun thing, where all the country's fired up over it, and every time there's a shooting, we freak out.
For sure.
Gun rights, blah, 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 blah. I will just say confidently to any listener that's out here right now, if a person walks into an entity with a weapon and knowingly and willingly brandishes that weapon and puts it out there and causes alarm and fear with their words or their actions to the point that they're threatening human life, that's actually really easy to confront.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's hard to confront is the husband and wife that have been having a domestic for the last 4 months behind closed doors, the kid that's been abused for the last 6 months, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The stuff that you wouldn't be able to detect because they put on their Sunday faces and they come to church and they check the box, or they're coming in because they're really seeking help, but they don't want anybody to know. That body language looks very, very different because the guy walking in the door with a gun, anybody can look at and go, oh my gosh, there's a guy with a gun scaring everybody, threatening to kill people. And you can stop that threat if you have to. It's really hard to stop domestic violence. It's really hard to stop child abuse.
Yes.
So when you ask me how big is it, it's what do we know? It's what's reported. It's not what we find, because the numbers are based on what's calculated after they're caught, not what is happening behind closed doors that you never see. And Jared actually made a really good point earlier. I had this stuff going on, and people listening to my podcast right now from my childhood days wouldn't have known. Well, that is the bigger number right there to me.
Yeah.
That's why I said it's probably the top 3 or 4 of all of our problems in this country.
Mine wasn't reported.
Yeah.
Yours wasn't. Well, yours was reported,
Mine
but
was
ignored.
Yeah.
And, that's interesting. You're right. The statistics can be very skewed about what we know and what we don't know.
Well, and in our church world, the reason I brought that up is I've actually, so just at one church, that big church I worked at, we went through 11 associate pastors and 2 full-time pastors, all with moral failure in 18 years. One church.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I was part of 2 church splits down in the South where we had moral failure and the church turned on itself. Prior to that, I watched abuse after abuse after abuse, going all the way back to my childhood. I could have left God in the church. I don't even like using that term, but I could have left God a long time ago. And somewhere in all this, he just kept working me. And I had to listen. And I'm 53 now, and I'm talking about things for the very first time in my life that, carried scars for years, but I also realized the grace therein, and that's got to be provided to other people along with safety. And that to me is, I think it's just where we've gotten it wrong in this country. We're so afraid of the things that seem scary when we should be embracing that and really looking inward at the stuff that's truly violating us and what's destructing our lives right now.
For sure. A lot of guys too that I speak to, and Jared, you've come across this as well. They'll avoid going to church because of all the failures that they see with the pastor or leaders. And that's why it's important that we keep our eyes on the Lord. And I tell them, I said, find a church that God calls you to. Number 2, make sure they're teaching the scriptures, right? That their scriptures are being taught faithfully every Sunday, that there's not an agenda, there's not a twist, there's not a guilt trip to take money, that really a church that's teaching the Bible that's led by the Spirit, right? And we're human, right? We've got a human condition in us, and we're all prone to fail at any time. So if a pastor fails, God will raise someone up. If it was built on the foundation of Christ, God will raise someone else up to lead the church.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that you stop going to church. It means maybe, Lord, this might be somewhere that I could be used to help others navigate through this time.
Yeah. Too often, we look at man, and if our focus is on man, they're always going to let us down, right? I dealt with that a lot of times, growing up in the church, going through like a lot of different hurts from that. But it was all based off of the lens of looking at the man and looking at that instead of like what you just said, keeping your eyes on Jesus, because man is going to let us down, Yeah.
One where, I think people that get stuck in God's not real. Where was God during cancer? Where, it's easy to ask those questions, but that's kind of what makes faith. Faith. I mean, for me, when I summarize it for somebody I will never Bible thump. You'll never win that argument. You'll never convert anybody. That's like screaming at somebody that doesn't know how to change a tire on how to change a tire. You're just never going to win, right? My go-to statement is I would rather believe and be wrong for a lifetime on earth than not believe and live it out and be wrong for eternity. Like it's just such a simple statement, and it's not mine. I took that from somebody that said it, and I'm like, man, that is actually just the simplest truth there really is. And it's God's truth. It's not, I mean, he says it, it's right here. And I don't know, man. I look at that and I think every time I stumble, every time I fall back in my own arrogance, I look back at the examples of my life. Those are the biggest regrets that I have. It's never trusting in something and following through. And so when people ask that question, what do we, where's God in this? Or, look at all these failures in church. Well, yeah, it's easy to do, but where's the battleground at? I mean, Satan's not going to go out in the middle of an Iowa cornfield. I'm sure that farmer has struggles, but I would bet that the church he goes to has 10 times the struggles, because you got 10 times the people with 10 times the problem being attacked in the one area that Satan doesn't want you to win in. So of course you're going to have moral failure and all that.
And recently, and I'm going to bring this up to Micah, because we've talked openly about it. You had every reason to start questioning God recently, with your wife, Jana, who was diagnosed with cancer. And you just corrected me earlier that it was radiation that she had, the first bout of radiation. And you're just watching her courage through this diagnosis. And I want you to talk about that, because she's become sort of a hero to you in your faith. And you've been very open about that. And I'll try not to get teary-eyed as you're talking, but it was inspiring to me, and it was a good reminder that I needed to hear when you shared it with me.
Well, I hope I can do justice for some listeners out there, because it's a 1 in every 2 thing. And as a medic, I've worked in cancer wards and stuff in the past when I was getting my licenses. I saw it and I watched it, and I saw especially the kids. Fast forward, we meet 2 years later. We're married, and she's finished her master's degree, got her deal. My wife's the healthiest human being I've ever met. And I don't mean like weird California vegan healthy. No offense, California. No, she swims 3,000 yards for a warm up, dude. That's one football plus 29 football fields more for a warm up.
Jared's wife's a swimmer too.
Yes, long distance swimmer. Yeah,
studette, right? So she eats amazing. I mean, she doesn't put syrup on pancakes or dressing on salad, not because she doesn't like taste. She just never has. And she's just been that gal her whole life, and no history.
She's missing out, bro.
Oh, dude, I tell her, doesn't care about diamonds and doesn't like chocolate either, which is, I married way up. So, so I eat all the chocolate for her. She's always kind of been my hero. Jana and I have actually known each other since we were 10. So there's some long history there, church camps and whatnot as kids, but we really didn't date until she was graduating her master's. So, fast forward to November 1, essentially, to whatever it was this past year, she went in for a routine mammogram, and they saw something and brought her back in to do a CT and a couple other things, and found out that she had cancer on the right side. And okay, so we'll deal with it. We'll go in. We started the process, and my wife, in the psychologist world that she's in, she actually is a psychologist counselor for a company here that does oncology rehab. She is their counselor for their rehabilitation specialists. So she just happened to be connected to this organization. And the gal
said that tongue in cheek. So
the gal that heads the organization got the images and looked at them and said, something doesn't look right here. Went back to the clinical team, brought it before the whole clinical team in the Denver market, essentially. And they said, yeah, we need to bring her back in. And had they not done it, I mean, she wouldn't be here.
Huh.
She had a second cancer that was not detected.
Yep.
And, it's hard for me to talk about because she's the love of my life and she's my everything, but we know who wins in the end.
Yeah.
And she is.
And that's what she said. She said something to that.
She did.
Fact to you.
Yes. We were sitting there. So I got to make light of this stuff because we kind of laugh about it a little bit now, even though she's just started radiation, this week.
Bro, don't start crying because you're going to make me cry.
No, I'm trying to hold it together a little bit, but so we go in before the surgery. I'm going to paint a vivid picture for you.
For sure.
So we got a female. When you talk about the love of Christ and humanity, I've got more culture on my wife's operational team.
Mm.
I mean, there's 6 different dialects going on in the room, like no joke. The female that's doing the removal is a full-blown admitted raging, like agnostic lesbian. I mean, she just came right out and said it to us. And yet she's the very best at her trade craft. And so we've been having really interesting conversations. That's another podcast. But the long and the short of it is I'm sitting in this room and they're drawing on my wife before she's going in for the surgery. And they're taking these markers out. And I'm realizing they're cutting her body as well as her identity in part, right? For sure. Because to a woman, that's part of you, right? Yep. I mean, to a dude, I'm like, oh, I lost a finger, whatever. And I'm right back in the game.
Yep.
You cut your breasts off. That's a piece of something that I don't think a man can completely relate to. And I'm watching her talk about with this doctor who clearly does not believe in Jesus in any way, shape, or form. And she's writing on Jana where she's going to cut, do all this stuff. And she says, so how you feeling? And she says, well, if I go into this and I don't come out, I know who wins in the end. And the doc said, who? And she says, I do. Because Jesus has already taken me home. I'm sure doctors hear this thing from time to time, but it was the way she reacted. I saw the doc's body language, and then it just kind of took off from there. So we have actually had engaging conversations with this doctor. So it's open doors is the point, right? And so we have the second type of cancer. And what we found out was this doc is going to do the removal while another doc comes in on the other side of the table at the exact same time and starts doing the implant surgery. So it's all done at one time, which was very powerful. The end result is they cut everything out. We go to specialists. They're saying chemo. This is going to be bad. And we got a series of testing done and found out that she had a 1.4% increased chance of survival by taking chemo, or 97%, 98% plus risk of it impacting her body negatively if she took it. We need to do radiation and hormone therapy. So she started radiation this week. Jana was diagnosed. I said the first, I think it was the 2nd of November. We had the surgery on the 29th, or she would not have made it to January.
Yeah. So as a man who obviously loves his wife as much as you do, walking her through, and I know how, you just told me you spent 6 hours in the last week with insurance companies arguing some things, and that can really weigh down on a man, right?
It's kicked my butt this week.
And thankfully you've got some good men in your life. I mean, we've talked, we sit down for coffee. And I know that's one of the outlets that you use to kind of cope with these things. And I know that you're in the Word and that God's sustaining you, but hockey, what else? What else do you do as you're walking your wife through these difficult times to keep, just keep your eyes plugged on the Lord? And obviously she's ministering to you the whole time as well.
So the question is, what do I do to stay focused on God?
What do you stay focused? Yeah. What do you do to stay focused on your faith? And even with the business that you're starting up, you know, as you're walking through these difficult times.
I can tell you, we go to Grace Chapel here in Castle Rock, and that has been, I am a deacon in the church. I serve in a King's Men ministry. It's a men's ministry. Mm-hmm. I'm helping we have a large elderly community. We have a good gray haired community there. Yep. It's actually pretty cool. And wisdom that I'm gaining from just helping those folks. I get to go over and hang a picture or do whatever they need in the moment, but we get to sit down and talk for an hour, and I get to listen to their struggles because half of them have lost their partners to cancer. And so I'm learning the journey they went through, but then I'm listening scripturally of what did you do? How did it impact you? And how can I walk that journey? What can I glean from that? So there's been an outpouring of love of that church for Jana to walk through, but it's just been a ministerial process that's been given to me from the men in the church where they've just kind of surrounded me. And I get to listen to people that have lived 25, 30 years longer than I have, that have lost their spouse, that wanted to give up and said, here's what's got me through. And they've just pointed the way, and very specific scriptures at times, just in the moment. And sometimes people mean well and they go sometimes too far with it, right?
For
like,
sure.
Here's what you got to go do in order, it's not the same for everybody, but at the end of the day, Michael, I will say my goal is to give my wife a soft place to land while leading well. And part of the way I do that is I dig in, but I'm listening to these other people that are walking through that just have wisdom.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's really, really important, because we as coaches, right? That's what we provide our kids. You're a JITS guy.
Yeah.
You train kids all the time. These men are training me right now for a future that I don't yet understand completely where it's headed. And I'm taking it in.
Yeah. In a multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. I think that's a scripture. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So it's about that time, Micah. We're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. And we like to do this.
That was a fast 20 minutes.
It was.
Yeah.
It was more than 20
Was it
minutes.
20 minutes?
No, this has been almost an hour
It's
now.
been awesome.
So we do this thing called Final Thoughts, and where you can drop some knowledge on some guys that are listening, some wisdom, something that you've talked about, or something that maybe God's just put on your heart as we've been discussing.
Okay. Yes, there is two things that hit me. One, while we were sitting here, when another man has gone through something, don't put yourself into a comparison with what that man is. Just walk a journey with him. Let him tell his story. I think that's what makes podcasts great. You get to come on here, you get to share a little bit. And it's not so much the perils or the good things, it's just the everything. When Jared said that, it actually really hit me. You really, I could see it in your face. And I kind of wanted to just stop talking and listen to you and let you tell that story, because there's something about getting it out. And I guess that's what I'm driving at, is the first thing is you got to get it out. And I didn't. I kept it inside and compartmentalized it for years. And I know since I shared, this is going back 9 years ago, I guess now, I told my wife I didn't share it with anybody else for another year. And then I actually revealed it to the church staff where I was at. And there was 105 people in the room. And of the 105 staff members who were in the room, 11 men came up and talked to me over the period of the next 6 to 7 months about the sexual abuse that they had endured.
Yes.
And 2 of them have now gone on to write a book. And so, but they had never shared it with anybody, not even their wives. So that's number one. If you got something that's inside that is just, that the release that comes from sharing it, God's wisdom when he says, go to an accountability partner, another man who walks the faith and release everything. Yeah. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. When I don't fully understand that yet. I know what it means, because each time I've done it, I have felt it. Like you said, the rucksack is a great example, man. It's like somebody just took 30, 40 pounds off my back. But I'm stupid and I let it build back up, and I do these little things over and over and over and over. And I think I got it again. And it's like my water bottle fills back up with crud and I got to dump it back out. So I got to go back to somebody. I don't know that I'll ever stop doing that, because I'm just broken. Yeah. I'm just a dude that screws up every once in a while. And I think we have this picture perfect thing of what Christianity is supposed to be like. And it's a bunch of garbage. You gotta have faith, and you got to ask for forgiveness and let go of it. So one is getting it out. And then the second thing I would say is, if you're walking a journey, and I say this to either men that are going to be married, want to be married, or are married, you need to give her a soft place to land every day. Every time you leave the house, it should be, I love you. And every time you walk in the house, it should be, I love you. And you have to show it. It's not just a statement. And I'm saying this from the law enforcement profession. I've worked, most cops have seen death. I just happen to be in an area where I saw a lot of it. both in the medical field and then what I did in law enforcement. And I've seen the other side of the heartbreak when you didn't say, I love you. You show up on the scene, or I've had to knock on the door and they collapse in my arms. But it all goes back to one moment in time for me. And that was Columbia, South Carolina, 1996, November 96. I had a chronic runaway. And I just happened to get connected with this family, and I dealt with this family over and over. She would run away all the time. And I showed up on a Friday night. Mom had called me and said, yeah, she's gone. And I remember to this day the feeling I had, two feelings. One, I looked at her and said, I'm like, Susan, come on. I know where she's at. I'll go get her. It'll be fine. Famous last words. And I backed out of the parking or the driveway. And I was doing undercover fugitive at the time. I just took an interest in this family because of their struggles. They happened to go to the same church we were in. And I backed out of the driveway. I drove an eighth of a mile on this back windy road to get back out to the main road. And I came around the corner, and she was in the middle of the roadway, and she had been hit by a truck, and she was essentially just blitzkrieged all over the roadway. And I got out of the car and I walked up, and I realized it was her. I didn't know it at the moment. And I turned around to start to go back to the house, and Mom was approaching me. And those words, she'll be okay. It'll be fine. It wasn't all of a sudden. And I just remember thinking to myself recently when my wife was going through this, don't say it'll be fine. Just give her a soft place to land and make it comfortable for her every day by letting her know she's loved. Don't promise something you can't deliver on. God will figure that out. And she ended up being my hero by saying, he's got this.
Don't make a promise that you can't deliver on. That's powerful.
Ever.
That's a great way to end. Well, thank you, Micah, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It was
Thank
good
you.
seeing you, and I'll probably be seeing you again here soon. And I'm glad Jared got a chance to meet you. You read
awesome.
your bio before. Sometimes Jared and I have these conversations like, hey, where did you meet this person? You know?
Yeah.
And so we have a podcast guest list, we had prayed over for the next 52 weeks. And it wasn't until we met that you were added to it.
Oh,
so I just didn't know when it was. Well, I knew.
What number am I, by the way?
This will be number
Six.
Six.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, you're the sixth
Wow.
guest.
I feel actually pretty honored.
And I'm looking forward to having you back on when you launch off into this new adventure.
Super exciting.
But if guys wanted to get a hold of you, is there a way to do that?
They can hit me at rethinktactics@gmail.com, and we'll just start off from there, and then we can exchange.
rethinktactics@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Good. And you'll be launching off social media and all that stuff.
Yeah, we'll hit I don't want to overpromise, under deliver,
gotcha.
but I'm guessing realistically in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We had, like I said, we have some commitment stuff with the church, and I got my wife's stuff going on, but we're pretty giddy to get this going. Yeah. This is a big deal to us.
Well, we love you, and we'll have you back in.
Thanks, brother.